carry the largest trans pride flag.
American outrage is the celebration.
Ukraine never, just like Israel would have never been invaded.
Well,
And then again, I'm searching online and looking for it. There's got to be some kind of proof out there for the globe that I can latch onto, right? So you find all these videos like top 10 proofs why we know the earth.
Because you go to a Catholic church, I'm sure you've attended this, but you're interested in Catholicism.
This might just be the best flat earth proof you've ever come across.
Placed under arrest on a charge of disorderly conduct.
Hundreds of protests are taking place right now across the country. Demonstrators telling the Trump administration, quote, hands off.
But there's a reason. There's a reason. There's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks. It's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking.
Welcome to the Vanairsdale Perspective. Real issues, raw truths. Hey, so on this first episode, we're going to dive into racism. What is it really? What is it? Can we even define it anymore? I don't know. It used to be prejudice against a certain people based on their skin color. I think it still is to a certain degree, but how prevalent is it really? On a macro level, it would kind of seem like we're worse off now than we were 50, 60 years ago. But why is that? So we're gonna try and dig into those questions and come up with some answers. Feel free to comment, but please like and subscribe. So we throw that word around a lot. You see it in media, every story that comes up. I'm sure everyone by now should know about the Carmelo Anthony case. One of the first things they did, and they made it a point to pinpoint and focus on Carmelo's skin color and the skin color of his victim. When you break it down to its bare bones, and this isn't about getting into the details of that case, but everybody saw it, the police report. It's pretty cut and dry. When you remove, if you can remove the biases that you may have towards certain people. Tribalism could be something like that. But either way, that case itself is pretty cut and dry. Kid brought a knife to school he wasn't supposed to. I had some back and forth exchanges online about, well, they weren't on school property, but actually they were. We have this thing called Google where you can actually look up Frisco ISD and the facilities that their policies pertain to, that they cover. The stadium that they happen to be at that track and field event that day, their policies covered that facility, meaning any kind of weapon was prohibited. And then other people brought up the fact that, well, the knife just can't be over Texas state law 5.5 inches. But even still, the state law is going to back up the school policy. You can add to, but you can't take away. I thought it was pretty cut and dry. But again, that's another instant where race kind of took over the headlines, the story, if you will. And it really shouldn't be that way. I guess one of the main reasons why I decided to make this my first podcast is because me, like many others, we don't really see a lot of how do I put this, critical thought and around the discourse that we have about certain topics in, you know, our town square, basically in social media. More times than not, people kind of switch off their brain, so to speak, and just be spoon-fed, you know, the information that they're given. And they don't give it a second thought. Oh, he was black or he was white. That's why, you know, it's not on the news as much because they were a specific skin color. And then people jump to their own conclusions about what took place and just let their wild imagination go wild. And it's pretty concerning. It's disappointing, but it's also fascinating. So yeah, so that's one of the reasons I wanted to make this my first podcast. I don't have any guests per se. I've put out some requests, so we'll see what happens with that. Hopefully on the next episode, I'd like to make an episode every week. And again, this first one being on racism. Anyways, so I grew up, mainly you can tell, I grew up back in the late 70s, in the 80s onto the early 90s, where I cut my teeth. Basically learned my interpersonal skills, professional relationships, yada, yada, yada. And if you ever talk, and I'm pretty sure you talk to your father, your mother, maybe even your grandmother, grandfather, they will tell you most definitely that racism was almost non-existent back then. Even though we weren't even 15 or 20 years removed from, you know, certain parts of the country still being segregated. You know, you had Jim Crow of the South and so on and so forth. But they will tell you most definitely that right now, in this day and age, racism is worse than it was for them. And like I said before, back then, and a lot of people have criticized other people when they say the phrase, "we don't see color," right? But if you're raised that way, not to judge a book by their cover and to judge them by their character, what else are you supposed to say? We literally, and it's not that we don't see the color, we understand and appreciate that that's a black woman, or that's a black man, or that's a Chinese person, but that's not our primary focus. Our primary focus is whether or not that person is, period, a good person. That's it. There's no other factor there. And people find that idea, that concept, hard to believe. You know, how could you not appreciate, well, and they'll even say, well, the fact that you profess not to see color, or that's your value that you grew up with, that almost automatically makes you a racist because you don't appreciate the hardship or, you know, whatever struggle that other, and then that depends too on, you know, what type of relationship do you have with this person? Is it a work relationship? Is it somebody that you see on the street? Nobody cares. You know, you jump in your truck or your car or whatever, you drive to work, you go to a gas station, you put fuel in your vehicle, you go to your job, you clock in, whatever you do, you check in, whatever, hey, I'm here. You have your work acquaintances, and then that's it. Rinse and repeat the next day. Doesn't mean that you're not polite or cordial to people that you see on the street or at work, for that matter, but at the same time, the whole nuanced piece about not appreciating someone's struggle and possibly having to treat other people, I don't want to say special, but, you know, sometimes differently, or putting them on a different tier in terms of how you treat that person based on how you treat everybody else, I think is hogwash. And I would appreciate if they gave me the same treatment. And it's the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated, or how you perceive that you would want to be treated. And I think that goes with discourse that we have today, yes, but when we talk about being civil as opposed to being respectful, I feel like that's different. I don't think it takes much effort to be civil. You know, give your salutations, good morning, yes ma'am, yes sir, no ma'am, how are you doing today, greeting of the day, things like that. But how many of you have gone out and just gone to the grocery store, for example, and you give a greetings to someone and they just look at you and keep walking? It's like you don't exist. So anyways, I'm going off on a tangent. Today, first episode, we're gonna dig into racism, okay? I've already laid out why this is near and dear to my heart, mainly because it was almost non-existent when I grew up. People didn't focus on that stuff. So why is it so prevalent today? Is it because of media? Is it because our academic institutions have unlocked a door, so to speak, in everyone's brain, and now we're just all subconsciously racist and biased towards other people, and we treat them inferior to our own, you know, ethnic background or our own culture or our own race? I don't know, man. You tell me. Tell me in the comments section. But that's it for this podcast. I'm not going to say it opened my eyes because I served close to almost 22 and a half years in the Army. So every quarter we had some sort of EO, anti-racist classes that we were required to take. So a lot of the language, a lot of the phraseology, a lot of the terms I'm pretty familiar with. Also helps that I was an EO rep for several units while I was in. So I dealt with time to time instances of perceived racism or bigotry or different things like that. Anyways, so individual racism. So everybody can agree that everybody can be or have a certain level of prejudice, right? That's with everybody. By the book, that's what it says, right? So I think that's true to a certain extent, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying about being civil as opposed to being respectful. I can be civil and not like you. I think everybody can, to a certain degree. Maybe not out in public, and like say, it depends largely upon what kind of setting you're in. So maybe not, we'll say out in public, like say you're in a crowd, maybe at a concert or at the beach. There's no rule that says I am required to be respectful, but I can definitely be civil. And being civil is nothing more than not stirring the pot. Basically not being a jerk off in public. You don't have to be respectful not to be civil. That's just where I stand. I think a lot of people get that twisted. But I come from, a time when respect was earned. And I'm not talking about respect for someone's right to free speech, bear arms, and any of that stuff. I'm talking about just being courteous, being civil to one another. And I think we've lost that because it's not required. I suppose that's the case. I know that's the case with me, but tell me your thoughts on that. So the thing that bothers me a little bit is, and I'm sure it bothers a lot of people in my age group, back, how I was raised, how I was brought up, is when they introduce the subconscious bias or the subconscious prejudices and racism, basically telling you that you might not be racist, like you might not verbally be racist or show it in a way that is perceived by most, but subconsciously you're making decisions and you're being racist or prejudiced and not know it. And it could be, super subtle to where you're not raising any red flags. And it could be something simple like if you were a supervisor, like when I was a supervisor, it'd be something like me overlooking one person and putting this other person up above in a different tier, mainly because of their skin color, right? And again, this goes back to when I was coming up, and a lot of people that I know have complained about this new academic way to describe racism in America. If you don't see color, if you don't visualize color in the same manner as, and no offense to Gen Z or any of the other younger groups, but if you don't visualize or don't perceive people based on their race, then we don't really pay too much attention to this subconscious stuff, right? Because we have better values. Well, I'm not saying we have better values. I'm saying our values are different, right? We don't really focus a lot on inner feelings, if you will. So you have individual racism, but then you have institutional racism. And I actually have a problem with this too. And I'm going to tell you why, right? So I mentioned before that I was an EO rep for several units throughout my career in the Army. And I was in the workforce. I came into the Army late. I came into the Army when I was 31. And yes, before you even asked, basic training was a bitch. It really was. It was tough. It was challenging. Thankfully, I kept myself in shape. I played ball throughout high school, so I came in, even though I was 31, I was advanced age, I came in pretty fit. So, but yeah, institutional racism, the only issue I have with this, and I think there, on some level, in some degree, you could probably make a case for this in specific organizations. But I'm not talking about major companies, major corporations. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about maybe private clubs and things like that. But I don't see how an institution could blatantly be racist towards another demographic without them being reported on, because there's mechanisms in place. And it's one of those scenarios where if you felt like you're being treated unfairly, and if you felt like the person was being racist or being prejudiced towards you, you can actually pick up a phone and call the overarching agency. You technically don't even have to go to your HR. You can go over your HR. So that part of it, the institutional racism, has always kind of left me in somewhat of a quandary in terms of how does that even, how would that even exist? So the only thing I can think of is cases of miscommunication. I don't have a real-time case file to put up for you, but like I said, this was part of my duties and scope when I was in the Army. So I don't understand how, like, if a soldier came to me and they gave me a valid complaint, they made a valid report or complaint, I have to honor that report. I have to investigate that report, and I must get the chain of command involved. It's no different in corporation, in any company. If an employee comes to you and they say, hey, John over here in Millwork, he made a remark to me that I found wholly unacceptable, and they make a report, they're gonna investigate it. Like, there's no reason why they wouldn't. Unless they're just a gaggle of douchebags that don't care if their employees are being discriminated against. But I can't think of any instance where that happened, not in my lifetime. And I think that's pretty huge because I've had a pretty long lifetime. So I'm not saying that there's not legitimate cases out there where HR or their supervisor, their immediate supervisor, or their district manager didn't take the complaint seriously. But folks, that's a serious allegation. So I'm leaning towards not accurate when I hear things like that, only because there's so many mechanisms in place to take care of someone if they're being treated unfairly. That's not the whole piece about institutional racism. That starts to delve into the systemic part, okay, which has a historical precedence. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I'm saying now in 2025, with the amount of equal opportunity, anti-bias, anti-racist, anti-prejudice programs and HRs that have been trained to deal with this sort of issue, the odds of a complaint falling on deaf ears is slim to zero. That's all I'm saying. So I'm not saying that I don't agree that there is such a thing as institutionalized racism, but I do think that there is historical precedence there, but it's not as prevalent. In fact, I'll go out on a limb and say it's not nearly as prevalent as what the news makes it out to be. I hope that makes sense. Cultural racism, right? That was the third one. Cultural racism. So what do you think about when somebody says that? Because I would like to know. Cultural racism. There are parts in this country where as a middle-aged white man, I can't go. Is that what they're referring to as cultural racism? Vice versa, there are places in this country where a black man should probably not go. Is that cultural racism? I think it is. I think that's what they're alluding to. So all these definitions that I pulled up when I did my research, they're all just a little bit on the ambiguous side. So you kind of like have to read between the lines. And really the cut and dry stuff that you'll probably get from Google more times than not than you will from any of these companies that actually put out this material. But anyways, yeah, cultural racism. Norms and narratives that uphold racial hierarchies. Again, does that sound like 2025? It doesn't to me. It's almost like when the C-19 thing popped off. People used to tell me or ask me, why don't you ever wear a mask? I said, well, I have yet to see dead bodies around my house. People dropping dead when I'm going to work. In fact, the only thing I saw were lines of people getting their free medicine. That's all I ever saw. And so when I hear all the different ways that a person can be racist, but then when I go outside my home and I turn the TV off, I go outside my home and I go to work, I don't see it. I base my observations solely on facts and evidence. And what evidence shows me when I leave my house in terms of racism today in 2025, I don't see it. I see people angry. I see people that they look at me, they may not want to engage. And I get it with all the stuff out there. It's an angry old white man. I mean, it just is what it is. And I hate that phrase, but how do I combat that? So the way I do it is I give a greeting. Hey, how you doing? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hey, let me get that. Let me help you with that. So that's what I do, but I've been doing that since I was a young lad. So I don't know. So those are the three parts. You've got individual, institutional, and cultural, right? So we're gonna move on. So here's one. Can a person of color be racist? Yes or no? Can it be racist? I think so. Can everyone have a prejudice? Yes, everyone can have a prejudice. So they can be prejudiced but can they be racist? So the way they define racist, you can be prejudiced, but if you lack the power, so you can't really be racist to the extent that you have the ability, I guess, to take action and demonstrate your racism. In other words, not hire this person based off the color of their skin. So you have to be in a certain position. I hate to tell you all this, right? So the one thing that kept popping up in my mind when I started researching this topic for this podcast is that there are more examples of the reverse that I've seen growing up throughout my working life, throughout the Army, than the other. Y'all catch my drift? I've seen more examples, real-time examples of anti-white racism than I have anti-black racism, in other words. Let me know if you concur with that. And I'm not saying good, bad, indifferent, whatever. That's an observation. And I want to make that clear because I try not to. I don't think I do. I have to actively look at the evidence in front of you and form your hypothesis on what's being shown, not go into a situation with your mind already fixated on what a particular outcome must be. So then you spend your whole time, say for instance, going back to the Carmelo Anthony case and the Austin Metcalf case. If you already have your mind made up that the reason why Austin Metcalf lost his life is because him and his twin brother were bullying Carmelo Anthony, and that's why he stabbed him in the chest in self-defense and killed him. If you're already to the mindset and nobody can sway your opinion of it without even seeing a police case file, police report, or whatever, then you're looking for evidence and facts to support your idea. And everybody, this is elementary stuff, right? But if you look at that case and you flush your biases and you just look at the facts, there's no question what happened there. And it's crazy. It's pretty phenomenal that media has ran with the story and just turned it into this big, incredible, fantastic, drama-laden, ridiculous story. Because the facts are all there. They released the police report in like a week? So you didn't have much time to wait. But in that week's time, a GoFundMe account was created, a Give Send Go account was created. You have everybody and their mama and their uncle and a niece and nephew talking about he's a hero. And I'm talking about Carmelo Anthony. He's a hero, this and that. Oh, it was pure self-defense and yada, yada, yada. And it's crazy. Not everybody did that, but it's just crazy when you think about it. Anyways, so the question is, can people of color be racist too? Of course they can. Why couldn't they be? If they're human, they can be racist. Are they all racist? No, absolutely not. But you know the ones that are. Hell, they make videos and post them on TikTok and other social media platforms telling you this, right? So the idea that I find it ridiculous. It's like, are they human or are they not human? So am I saying that I can be racist? Yes. Am I a racist? No. But the possibility is there. I think any person on this planet can be a racist. Just like any person on this planet, if they're breathing air and they've got blood coursing through their veins, they can do dumb stuff from time to time. They can make terrible decisions from time to time. And that's when you have to lean on your values, the value system that you were brought up with as you were growing up, right? Then you talk about likelihood. So it's less likely that I would be a racist based on the circumstances and the environment that I grew up in, that I was raised in, compared to someone who grew up in the deep South in an all-white neighborhood. You catch my drift? So it just depends. And I think it also depends on people's personal experiences. There's people out there who have had pretty bad, I happen to have had some pretty bad experiences with people not of my racial background. And I could have used that as fuel and an excuse to be a racist. But I chose not to, right? Because it's not right. You're talking about a small group of people compared to a whole racial demographic, and it's ridiculous. And I think anybody who does that is weak. So that's just me. That's my personal take on it. So the book answer is no. You're probably already expecting that. And mainly because they're marginalized and they hold no power. I disagree with that. Again, leaning on my own experiences throughout the U.S. military, U.S. Army. I've had more supervisors, more first sergeants, company commanders, brigade commanders, and so on and so forth, platoon sergeants who are not white. That's not a biased observation. That's just an observation, right? So I don't, and even now, since I've entered the civilian workforce, there's only one person in my entire department, in my entire company, that's white. Only one supervisor, direct line supervisor. There's an assistant manager that's white. Other than that, that's it. So again, 2025, I don't see it. And it's almost like our culture is, in terms of the history of racism and racism in general and how it is in this country right now, it's almost like, man, you could have come out with this material like 50, 60 years ago. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for this to come out today. And I hope that makes sense, but even if it does, it's like, is it because there's just so much hatred going on in the world today and people are assuming it's because of someone's color? And I tell you seriously, if you're a jerk off, I'm gonna treat you like a jerk off. And I don't care what color you are. And most people my age will expound upon that same type of sentiment. I don't care if you're Chinese, I don't care if you're black, I don't care if you're Polish. If you're a good guy, I'm gonna treat you like a good guy, right? If it's reciprocal. But if it's not, and I can't even get you to say, hey, how you doing? Or good morning, and you just kind of look at me, that's how you're gonna get treated. And that may not be the right answer, but it's mine. And this is the Vanairsdale Perspective. So anyways, getting back to it. So this is a quote from some of the research that I did, right? This is based on public perception, right? And this is something that I've been harping on for the past several minutes. And based on the 3 phases of racism: individual, institutional, cultural, people of color, racism, how racism is prevalent today. The short discussion we had about, is it really racism? Have we lost the narrative as far as what racism actually is? Is it as prevalent today as it's being made to be? I guess that's the biggest question. I personally don't think it is. One thing I noticed about it is not that my perception was skewed, but I think it was. And I think the only way a person finds that out is if they turn that TV off. Press button. Crank that TV off and just communicate with people. Block out the noise, just communicate with people, treat people civilly, right? And go on about your day. You know, do the job that you're getting paid to do. Be polite to others and keep it moving. Where does that leave us now? And I don't want to discount the historical nature of racism. And I'm not going to sit here and beat a dead horse, but we know the roots of racism. Transatlantic slave trade, European colonialists, the list is endless, but that's where it came from. So that's not opinion, that's fact. And I think anybody who's read any kind of history on the matter, they know that, right? But where does that leave us in 2025? Are we supposed to just keep reliving past mistakes? Because you can't, history is history, right? You can't change it, right? You can only do better as a culture moving forward. Do we even know how to do that? Because I feel like in 2025, I've had people older than me telling me that things are worse now than they were back when segregation and things like that were at their height, their apex. So what are we doing as a culture? And this is supposed to be a shared culture. It's not just my country, it's your country, it's everyone's country, regardless of their ethnical background, their race, demographic, whatever. How do we move forward if we're constantly reliving the past? Makes sense, right? So please comment. And I wouldn't say necessarily that people are arguing over what racism is. I think people are arguing a couple things. I think people are arguing about whether or not racism actually exists, if it's all in our head. And then you have the perpetual offended. You know who I'm talking about, right? And that can be anybody, any ethnic background, any demographic, any culture. The perpetually offended. You know, that person that y'all know what I'm saying. It's that person that you find yourself walking on eggshells because you're careful about, you know, how you say and what you say, different things, because you don't know how to take them. And there's really no right way or wrong way to say something. That's why I'm straightforward. So what are you gonna do? At max, you get mad. But then that's it. This is important. On one side, people saying we're all equal now, stop complaining. On the other, communities still facing disparities in wealth, health, and education. Social media oversimplifies. Politicians weaponize it, and schools sanitize it. So let me get back to that first point, right? One side, people are saying we're all equal now, stop complaining. On the other, communities still facing disparities in wealth, health, and education. So I'm gonna speak on the first part. There's nothing wrong with appreciating where you come from, right? So do I have to appreciate it to a certain extent that I am basically placating your feelings? I don't think so. First most distinct thing that I can think of when I hear that is the first thought that I have is that you weren't there. You would have to break it down to me how disparities that happen to your great grandfather or mother or aunt, uncle, relative, the disparities that happen to them, how they are affecting you today, right? Now, if you can articulate that and show evidence of people literally being racist toward you and not giving you the same opportunities as the next person, regardless of race, regardless of demographic, then you have a case. But if you're just, climbing onto the bandwagon of, hey, I'm such and such, I'm of such color, I deserve such and such because my people have been such and such, I don't have time for that. There's been so many people across the globe that have been demoralized, made slaves, been treated less human than their close relatives, that you can't even begin to fathom the amount of people that would now be able to say, hey, since such and such was treated this way, then I deserve to be. No. If that was the case, then virtually I can think of almost every demographic on the planet that would have a similar case. Who do you get your reprieve from? Do you get it from me? Do you get it from the US government? Do you get it from some other agency? See, I don't know. I'm asking you. Communities still facing disparities in wealth, health, education. That's your politicians. That's the people that you have on your city council. Again, communities used to be tight-knit, so you had a say on who was on the school board. You had a say who was elected, and you still do, I guess. But you had a say in a lot of different areas, and it's still this way in small rural communities. So when I hear these blanket statements about education inequality, wealth gaps, wealth inequality, health inequality, when I hear things like that, I don't agree that you don't have the same chance to be afforded an opportunity to take advantage of these things to improve your life moving forward. So, and I was talking about this with somebody else the other day. We'll take St. Louis. There's an area in St. Louis where the homicide rate is like just ridiculous. And when she told me this, it was my wife, when she told me the numbers and stats, the homicide rate compared to, the amount of 100,000 people, it was a ridiculous rate. I was like, babe, that's a combat zone. That's more significant than any combat zone that I've ever been in. So my next question was, why are people still living there? Would you live in a combat zone? I wouldn't. So I came from one, several. So I'm not gonna go from a combat zone overseas and then stay or move into one in the United States. That's a situation where you move everybody out, demolish it, and build it back up and move everybody back in. It is what it is. I don't care. Like that's ridiculous to me. But anyways, I just thought I'd share that because they were talking about, when I was researching this, housing was one of the things that came up. And again, back when I was growing up, and more so before my time, communities were closer knit. And everybody knew their neighbors, right? And I'm pretty sure if you talk to your grandparents or your mother and father, they'll tell you that. Everybody knew their neighbors. You didn't live in a neighborhood and not know, at least not know the people that lived next door from your left to your right and across the street. I know I did. I may not have known every single person that was on my block, but I knew the person to my left, I knew the person to my right, I knew the person across the street. There was probably one or two groups of people that I didn't know, but that's only because there were rentals. Some people were going in and out of the house like crazy. Maybe not too bad. It was a good neighborhood, but they did have a few rentals there. Not that I have a problem with rentals, but you know what I'm saying? So there was a quote that came up in one of mine. This goes along with some of the stuff that we talked about here. If your zip code determines your life expectancy, your school budget, your chances at employment, that's not just economics, that's systemic racism. So it's almost like we're in a show. Because how do you fix that? It doesn't. So and I'm going off the rails on this, but it's like these big cities. I lived in Columbus, Ohio for a little while for a job, and some of the neighborhoods they have up there are fantastic, great neighborhoods. But then you get down into like not the inner city, but I was probably about 25 minutes away from downtown Columbus. Tent cities everywhere. What's causing that? And why is nothing being done to correct it? Why do you have all these homeless people living in tents? I'm talking men and women in their mid-20s. Small kids living in tents behind shopping strip malls. Was it planned that way? I don't know. So when I hear phrases like that, if your zip code determines your life expectancy, which it may very well be the case, but here's the problem with that. You have a city council, you have a mayor, you have a governor, they have a budget, they have a means. I'm assuming they have a police force. They have a means to clean that up. So is it because they're refusing to? Is it because they don't care? Those are the things that don't make any sense to me. So I'd like to know what you guys feel about that. I know what I feel about that. I'm saying you have these institutions for a reason. So if you have a homeless problem, why aren't you not addressing it? Well, we did this, we spent this much money. Where'd the money go? Where did the money go? And this is going off on another tangent, but if you can spend millions of dollars housing illegals in hotels in New York, you can damn sure spend a few $100,000 and get some of these folks out of these tents and get them with the roof over their head. And they have children. You know what I'm saying? So look, this is my first episode. I have a video camera. I'm actually doing it on my phone. You can probably tell the audio's not going to be that great. But for those of you who have watched, I appreciate your time. Please leave a comment, some helpful criticism. I've been planning to do this for a long time. I don't know why I've waited so long. I feel like I have a lot of things to say. But again, racism is one of those things where I don't even know what's going on anymore. And I know there's people my age group who kind of feel the same way. It's like why are we not evolving? We're constantly reliving the same things over and over again. For what? That's what I want to know. For what? Is it an agenda? What's the purpose? To keep people divided? That might be the overarching purpose. That's the only reason that I can think why the idea and the concept of racism still exists today. It's like these jokers, and y'all have heard this before, they have the concept of life support, and they just keep feeding it through a feeding tube. You know what I'm saying? So they won't let it die. They just keep feeding it. So what is racism? I've given you the definition. Most of you folks already knew the definition. Is it because we live in a society built on false hierarchies? I don't know what's false about it. We have our institutions, we have our government institutions. I don't think it's a bad way to do things. I happen to like capitalism. And there's opportunity for you to actually occupy one of the positions, any number of positions that actually control our way moving forward. I say moving forward a lot because I don't see us moving forward. I see people stuck in this paradigm, that paradigm, basically doing the same thing over and over again. So if this made you think, hey, hopefully I was able to convey and not come off kind of like scatterbrained too much, yeah, but I tend to start talking and that happens sometimes. But if it made you think, good, share it. Start a conversation. So my show is going to air on Spotify. Definitely going to be on YouTube, and I'm going to be putting new episodes up every week. And I think I'm going to let this next one be a surprise, right? But there's going to be a little video in it, probably less talking. But I hope I was able to make you think, like I said before. But if you like my content, please like it, subscribe, share it. But stay aware, stay bold, and stay honest.